Hello there and welcome to our webinar on flexible working in a post-pandemic world. My name is Tracy Bird and I run the SCVO information service, and thanks to you all for joining us today. And just to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available later on the SCVO website. Also, we'll send out any slides and any additional resources to you all after this webinar by email. So the pandemic has significantly changed much about the way we work, normalising remote working for many. And as organisations think about returning to offices, it's time to consider whether a hybrid working option is the way ahead. There's lots to consider if we're going to get this right. And today we're going to look at the potential challenges, opportunities, and emerging trends around flexible working. I'm delighted that we have with us today Geraldine Higgins from Flexibility Works, who will discuss their recent research and what hybrid working could look like. We've also got Lindsay Macpherson, who is SCVO's HR and Employment Support Service Manager, and she's going to highlight some of the practical HR steps you need to consider. And last but certainly not least, we have Maddie Stark, and she is SCVO's Digital Development Officer, and she's going to look at how effective communication is really crucial for flexible working to work, and what are the right digital tools you need. So just before we start, I'd like to do a quick poll to get a sense of where you're all at right now. And that is all about, as restrictions ease and offices begin to reopen, I want to know your thoughts on the future of the way your organisation is going to work. So if you think staff are going to work from home permanently this going forward, or you're thinking about a hybrid model, or you might be going to go to full-time working back in the office. So I'll just give you a few seconds just to get the temperature of the room, really. And I think, well, pretty much definitely everybody's thinking about adopting a hybrid model of working. So that's great. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So hopefully you'll find this really useful. I encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A facility as we go, particularly as we've got access to a lot of expertise here today. And now I'll hand over to Geraldine. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Tracy, for that lovely welcome. Hello, I'm Geraldine Higgins, Head of Partnerships with Flexibility Works. And thanks so much, first of all, for inviting us along to speak as part of the webinar today. Flexibility Works, first of all, is a social business backed by the Scottish Government. And it's our ambition to work with organisations and employers like yourselves to ensure that as many people as possible benefit from flexible working. So we have vast experience across the team of working with different organisations of all sizes and across all sectors. And I know that you're all joining from different third sector organisations today with different challenges and priorities. But I think it's clear from the poll result there that, the discussion around hybrid working is one that's very much front of mind for all of us at the moment, and thinking about the challenges and opportunities that presents and that lie ahead in terms of our working culture is kind of, one of the topics that we're going to look at as part of today's session. So for the part of the session that involves Flexibility Works, what I want to do is really help you in your thinking and planning about how your organisation is going to work going forward in a post-pandemic world. I'm going to highlight, first of all, some of the highlights from our research that we conducted through 2020, which looked at firstly flexible working before COVID, through the pandemic, and also expectations for the future. I'll then speak about hybrid working in terms of what successful hybrid working may look like and some of the key pitfalls to think about. And I also want to try and make the session as interactive as possible. So we are going to include just a quick breakout for you guys to go off in small groups and speak about what your organisations need for hybrid working going forward. So to look at the research, first of all, I don't want to state the obvious, but obviously it has been a very tough year for organisations of all sizes and in all sectors. The one positive that has come through from it, though, is that mindsets have shifted significantly in relation to flexibility as a result. So throughout 2020, we were commissioned by Scottish Government to speak to over 250 employers and 1,000 employees from different sectors. And what we found out is that employees and employers alike recognise that the way that we work has definitely changed permanently as a result of living through this experience. Attitudes to flexibility have changed. Employers and employees are now using this moment in time as an opportunity to pause and reshape how we work going forward. And I think people are sensibly taking the chance to think about what we've learned through the pandemic and how that's going to shape working culture going forward. So to kick things off, I'm going to break you out into small groups in just a couple of minutes, if you don't mind. I want to ask you to think about hybrid working for your organisation. And essentially the question here is, what does your organisation need now in order to make a success of hybrid working? I don't expect you to have all of the answers, but you're going to be in small groups and we want to try and give everybody the opportunity to speak. So we'll give you 5 minutes in your breakout. When you come back, we don't expect everyone to feedback because we're too large a group for that today, but do feel free to pop any comments in the chat if you'd like to as you come back in. So the question again is, what does your organisation need right now in order to make a success of hybrid working? Joanne is going to pop you off into your groups and we'll bring you back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, great. So I can see everyone's rejoined the main session. Hopefully that was useful. I wanted to give you the chance to just pause for a moment and discuss what's happening with your organisation. And really, I guess, take the chance to compare how that chimes with some of what we've found out from the research. So one of the things that we've really tried to highlight for employers is that this is not a revolution. You know, the change in the way that people are thinking about work and the level of flexibility that they have is obviously not new. This view of work has been taking shape in the UK for over the last decade. However, what the pandemic has done is significantly accelerated the rate of change. We knew that pre-pandemic 3/4 of workers in Scotland said they had or they wanted flex. So the demand was already widespread. And when we asked people about why they worked flexibly, they told us it makes them happier and it makes them healthier. So it's important to people for all sorts of different reasons. It can often relate to caring responsibilities, yes, but interestingly, that came after work-life balance and better mental health and well-being. So the research and the stats that you see up here indicate that it is about small changes. People are looking to be able to flex the start and finish times of their day, potentially take some time out in the middle of the day to work on something else or deal with a problem at home and work again in the evening. And typically that level of flexibility and that type of change is what we're seeing more people ask for rather than a wholesale change to working patterns. But it's not, and it shouldn't be one-sided. You know, on the employee side, yes, it's about better work-life balance, better health and well-being, but the benefits are certainly there for employers as well. In our survey, Scottish business leaders told us that those who offered flexible working improved employee loyalty, helped attract more diverse talent to the organisation, boosted productivity by keeping their employees engaged and committed, and were also better able to support employee well-being as an inclusive employer. And although it's not been an easy time for businesses of all different types, COVID has certainly shaken up our thinking and accelerated that desire for greater flexibility. So even for those who had flexibility in their working life before, the demand has increased. Currently, over half of Scottish workers say they're considering requesting more flex for the future. And for those who didn't work flexibly before, or even for those who did, they're looking for greater flexibility. So I guess what we're saying is that for employers who were doing well on the flex stakes before the pandemic, expectations have increased there as well and have increased across the board. with a push really to focus more on output rather than hours. And I think this quote here from Fife Council really helps to illustrate that you know, people are looking for more flexibility. It's in smaller amounts. It's, you know, in terms of being able to work from home more often than they did before, and being able to focus on outputs rather than the hours delivered. I think the other thing that we know is that people have really missed the social interaction of coming to work and seeing colleagues. People struggled with isolation. That came through really loud and clear from the research. But on the other side, they've also, you know, really enjoyed being able to avoid the daily commute. They've saved money and had more time for family and more time to exercise and for other things. So 61% of employers expect to offer more flexibility and more home working going forward. But this doesn't necessarily mean that people are looking to work exclusively from home. I think what we've seen, particularly from your response to the poll there, is that it is a bit a blend of home and office-based working. And initially what that really means for teams and for line managers at this point in time is that it's about, you know, a bit more forethought and planning required to get that right for teams. Equally, some people never want to work from home again, given the option, and others would rather go 100% remote. Looking at some of the questions that had been asked in preparation for today's session, some people had asked about working from different locations, and I spoke to a guy a few weeks ago who wanted to relocate to Barcelona for a few months and continue in his sales role for an Edinburgh-based company. So what he's been able to do, because it's not a permanent change to his residence, is to continue in that role. But actually, if it had been a permanent change and he didn't have a UK-based residence, there would have been tax implications for the employer, and the employer would have, you know, in that scenario had to say no. But with it being more of a temporary arrangement, you know, that's been possible. So I think we know that we're going to see a huge increase in people who want to work from home more frequently. And so for businesses, it's about a mix of, you know, that hybrid of office and home-based working. The trend that we're seeing starting to emerge already is people looking for probably 2 to 3 days in the office and the rest of the time at home. And for some people, you know, like our guy in Barcelona, they'll be looking to take it further. You'll also have seen stories in the media about employers who are going for one extreme or the other, either completely closing offices or, you know, telling people that it's going to be necessary to come back, like it or not. I don't think either option is hugely advisable.
Geraldine?
Yes?
I'm sorry for interrupting you. It's Alice here. I can't see your slides anymore. I don't know if you stopped sharing the screen.
Yes, I did.
Did you? Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
okay.
you.
Sorry. Yeah, and so for, you know, the majority of businesses, what we're saying is that now is the right time to invest in listening to employees, taking a measured approach and understanding really what they're going to be looking for from employers going forward. For many organisations, that means redefining what the office space might look like, looking at local hubs, use of co-working spaces, and perhaps losing some of their office space, but not all of it, and redesigning the space that they do have to make it more collaborative for people and for teams to book and use on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure all of you personally are thinking about what your arrangements are going to look like on a personal level as well as for your organisations. And, you know, hybrid working will develop on a scale that we haven't seen before, but the concept itself isn't particularly new. Many organisations have been working this way to a certain extent for a number of years. So I'm just going to introduce some of our thinking around successful hybrid working and what we think that might look like. I think first of all, it's about giving people choice that enables them to have a better work-life balance. And obviously that results in people being more engaged, committed, and ultimately more productive and less likely to leave. In order for that to work in a hybrid sense, they need to be involved in designing the processes and protocols that support hybrid working within their specific team. It also opens up the talent pool, as you don't have the same geographical constraints that you may have had in terms of recruiting. And there's the potential to, you know, realise some savings through cutting office space and running costs. Not that that's a key driver, but obviously an additional benefit at an organisational level that's worth noting. There's also the potential to significantly take steps towards achieving your environmental and sustainability goals, which is something that we're all, increasingly conscious of. So I think first up, at a very basic level, it's about making sure that we get the tech right for people, that they have the correct hardware and software, as well as the right physical space to work safely and effectively, whether that be at home or in an office space. At a leadership level, it's worth thinking about some guiding principles around hybrid working so that you can clarify for people what the parameters of this approach are, and if there are boundaries that employers need to be aware of that relate to core hours, for example, or etiquette for diary management, that those are clearly outlined in the guidelines and that they're embedded across the organisation in a way that's fair and consistent for everyone. At this point in the process, it's also good to maybe think about updating or creating your home working policy to ensure that health and safety practices are properly considered and people are properly assessed in the place that they're working in. And at a team level, it's really advisable to encourage teams to become involved in this conversation and to work together to create the team protocols that are going to work for them. So, for example, discussing things like how often they want to meet face-to-face and why and where that's going to be beneficial. What processes need to be in place so that everyone knows where their colleagues are working and when. It may be an obvious point to make, but good internal comms is going to be really important. I think comms becomes even more important when everyone's working in different places. You can't necessarily rely on people finding things out from simply being in the office. At a more holistic level and thinking about mental health and well-being, over the course of the pandemic and certainly in recent years, we've all become more aware of work-related stress issues and poor mental health, and that's been magnified significantly throughout the pandemic. So the number of people experiencing poor mental health in the workplace is increasing, and it becomes harder to spot the signs when you don't have colleagues working alongside you and they're working more remotely. It's good to think about training up managers and colleagues across the organisation as mental health first aiders, helping managers spot the signs and recognise if there are issues going on with colleagues. I'm sure many of you have had experiences in this area throughout the pandemic, so I think the initiatives that people have put in place to help deal with this, such as regular virtual catch-ups, online exercise and mindfulness, it's a good idea to think about continuing with those as you develop a hybrid approach, given that there will always be a remote element to the way that people are working. And I think, with home workers, there can be a tendency for people to overwork. So it's good to look out for some of those signs, like, for example, emails coming through in the middle of the night. It's going to feel strange for people to come back to workplaces on one level or another. And I think we can expect that anxiety levels will be higher as a result. So it's a good time to think about, ramping up employee health and wellbeing initiatives. I am going to leave it there for this part of this section. I know that we have time allocated for Q&A later on, so I'm happy either to take questions now or park that until the end if that's helpful and move on to the next session.
Thanks, Geraldine. Lindsay, I think it's time for your presentation. Thanks. You're on mute, Lindsay.
My unmute button was further down the screen. Apologies for that. Right, I'll just share my screen. Oh, for some reason, I've got the top bar up there. Hold on, there we go. Move that top bar down. Okay, so hopefully everybody can now see my screen.
Yeah, good to go.
Thank you. So we're going to be, Geraldine's covered quite a lot there, and there will be some crossover in what we're talking about. But what I'm my part is about looking at some things you want to consider, maybe some practical steps if you're moving to that flexible hybrid working environment. And Geraldine's already touched on it, but that engaging and communicating with your staff, that's going to be key. You need to involve them in it and actually seeing about why you're doing it, what you need to consider, and what steps you can take. Geraldine's already mentioned the potential benefits that apply to employees and employers, so I'm not going to be covering that. So my key messages, from my point of view, the key areas to focus on are, if you haven't already moved to a new way of working, are the importance of planning, engagement, communication, and employee well-being, all things that have kind of been mentioned already. The more you plan for a return, the better you'll be prepared, and the more likely it will work when it's actually implemented. And yes, we've all known over this last year that it's not been easy, given that the rules and regulations have been changing on an almost daily basis, and they may continue to change. Whether it's that regularly or not, I think that's the thing that might change. And some of you, as I said, have already taken actions, and regardless of any uncertainty, I think it's good to plan. Plans can be put on hold and then they can be reactivated, but at least you've undertaken that first step. The importance of engaging and communicating with your staff cannot be underestimated. It's a recurring theme, as I've said. Geraldine's mentioned it, I'm going to talk about it, and it will be a focus of Maddie's session as well. If you have teams in the organisation who cannot work from home or work remotely, it's important to be mindful of this during the planning process. It's possible there may be some resentment or frustration that they don't have the choice of where they can work from. So ensuring that they feel listened to and engaged with just as much is important. And it's also worth trying to consider, are there other ways in which they could work flexibly, as Geraldine mentioned, earlier start times or later start times or earlier leaving times? Is there flexibility around that? Could shift swapping be an option? Trying to be a bit creative about what you could do. Being away from the office has impacted on everybody's well-being. Some may have thrived, others may have struggled. And it's so important that we ensure consider employee well-being when thinking about returning to the office and how staff will work in the future. So areas you may wish to consider. Having a focus on employee well-being during the planning and implementation stages of returning to the workplace will be welcomed. Many people might be feeling anxious and unsure, or might just need some more time to settle into their new working arrangements. As I said, their well-being may have been affected by feeling socially isolated, or in actual fact, they may have enjoyed working on their own and they may not be looking forward to coming back into a workplace where there are lots of people. They may be feeling anxious for a number of reasons. How safe will the workplace be when they return? Their actual situation may have changed since they've been at home. How will it work going back to the workplace? They may have been furloughed for a number of months, they may have lost confidence. If they wish to work from home, how will that be seen by the organisation? Is that an okay thing to want to do? And if individuals do continue to work from home or remotely, will not being in the workplace count against them? Not necessarily deliberately, but if they are less visible, will they be forgotten about? And as Geraldine said, managing staff and managing them remotely and from actually based in a workplace are different skills. And line managers are likely to need support in moving to managing their staff and teams remotely. They may have coped when it was a temporary situation, but moving to this as a permanent way of working is different and is likely to need these different skills. And remember, you still need to manage staff, whether they are in your office or working remotely. The same absence, conduct, IT, performance management, policies and processes still apply. Within communication and engagement, ask staff how they feel they would like to return. Involve them in your plans. Tell them what steps you've already taken in planning for their return. Ensure they can access the risk assessments that you've undertaken if they haven't already been involved in this process. And ensure they're aware of and can access any other relevant information. So, as I just mentioned, involving staff is key. So consider undertaking a staff survey, if you haven't already, to understand how they're feeling, what they would like to see going forward, and what concerns they have. As you say, it might just be small changes they're looking for. Now, seeing induction programme under there might seem a bit strange to some people. However, staff may well have been away from the office for 12 to 18 months. Office layouts are likely to have changed. You may have had to review your organisation's strategy or structure. New staff will have joined and others may have left. And one of the key things about managing expectations, explaining the drivers for change. People may have made assumptions and explaining actually where you're coming from is important so they know what is the right situation. Provide the thinking behind decisions and keep to agreed timelines wherever possible. Be transparent and upfront. You may not be able to support everybody's requests, as this could affect operational delivery. Staff need to understand this, and generally they do, but it's always good to restate these things. Remember, employees with at least 26 weeks continuous employment can make a request for flexible working, limited to one request in any 12-month period, but that's under the statutory scheme for any reason, and such requests must be dealt with in a reasonable manner. You need to consider how will you deal if you get a lot of requests. Is it going to be case by case, first come, first served, team discussion? Initially, you may wish to say that no request will be considered until X date. Pick a date. So if it is a first come, first served, everybody's got the same opportunity of applying at the same time. To ensure that requests are dealt with in a fair and consistent manner, you should have a clear process in place for considering them. You need to be mindful of not making decisions which could indirectly discriminate against people. E.g., parents being given the priority seems a good idea, but could actually indirectly discriminate against younger or older workers. And to avoid any indirect discrimination claims, employers are best placed to assess requests on a case-by-case basis, to not make any assumptions about how arrangements will or won't work, and to remain as open-minded as you can to suggested working patterns, unless they are wholly inappropriate. Where a request is to be rejected, it can only be done for one of the 8 reasons set out in law, and these are the burden of additional costs, detrimental effect on ability to meet customer demand, inability to reorganise work amongst existing staff, inability to recruit additional staff, detrimental impact on quality and on performance, insufficiency of work during the periods that the individual would like to work, and planned structural changes. Another key part is about your policies, reviewing and updating relevant policies. If you do choose to implement a hybrid working arrangement, be mindful of employees who will be working from home or remotely permanently in relation to unintended exclusion and inequality. Just because somebody is less visible as they're not in the office shouldn't mean they aren't afforded the same opportunities as those who are. So alongside your flexible working or your home or remote working policies, it might be worth reviewing your equal opportunities policy to include a section on your plans of how you will ensure equality between those who work from home or remotely and those who work in the office more regularly. Hybrid working is a form of flexible working, so you may wish to update your policy to include this as a specific category, or you may wish to develop a hybrid working policy. Are there any other policies you might need to review? Recruitment, performance management, absence. All things just to consider. So again, what other steps could you be taking? Your organisation's circumstances may have changed over the year, so it's key to consider any principles or boundaries you want to induce. For example, are there core hours everybody needs to work, or is there more flexibility? Is there a culture of trust? So people are able to complete their work when it suits them in a way that works for them. And that goes back to Geraldine's point of saying if they want to work at night or, you know, in the evenings, how is that going to work? There might be a weekly meeting that everybody needs to attend in person, or you want the teams to be together physically every so often. So it's important to clearly communicate that to gauge how they feel about that. You can then collaborate on team protocols that work for everyone. And Maddie's going to come on to that. Managing staff remotely, as I've already said, it's different from managing site-based staff. And you probably will need to look at what kind of skilling or updating your managers need in the way of being able to do that. You know, for example, you know, it may be performance management, because this is now looking at outputs, making sure that your performance management covers that. Or actually, it may even be chairing virtual meetings. We've all done it, but actually there's probably some skills that we need to really know. So if you're moving to making permanent changes, for example, making someone's home their permanent base, then you should review contracts and update the terms and conditions to reflect this. Remember, when you're making any changes to terms and conditions, you need to consult with the individuals affected. Ensure staff are aware of any tax implications, home insurance issues that they may have to consider. Ensure the organisation is aware of any implications in relation to your employer's liability insurance. Each organisation's circumstances may differ, so you'll probably need to speak to your own insurers. Ensure managers and staff are aware of their health and safety responsibilities. Everybody still has a responsibility to ensure the health and safety and the employer of their staff, and also them of themselves. Check you have an up-to-date lone workers policy, as home workers probably are classed as this if there's nobody around to look, if they are on their own. You can find more information on the Health and Safety Executive's website. There are lots of guides there and checklists that you could consider. And as Geraldine said, supporting staff wellbeing. Again, you've got Public Health Scotland and Mind are good signposts for guides that are available. You may also want to think about wellness action plans, things like that you can put in place, stress assessments. In relation to the working environment, check whether the working environment, the home or the office, is set up correctly. Do staff have the right equipment to do their job? People may have made do in a temporary situation, and that changes when they're going to be doing it permanently. Plan how you will check, maintain and repair the equipment. Ensure the appropriate risk, stress and display screen equipment assessments are undertaken. And also, if people returning to the workplace, make sure that it's actually set up for them to return safely. Consider how, as Geraldine said, how people switch off. You know, one of the real concerns is that we blur that home and working environment. So you need to kind of think, what is working, what's not working, what boundaries should we have in place? And that goes to regularly reviewing. I think if you're putting things in place, they're not going to stay the same the whole time, and it's worth reviewing it. And actually, it might be worth considering, do you put in a transition period, so it's a 6 to 12 month transition phase? So coming to the conclusions I've had, that's a quick run through of the areas I think need to be considered and potential steps that you could be taken to mitigate and support. It's important to consider what's best for the organisation as well as the employees, to find solutions that work for everyone. It is going to be a journey, and one where we will all learn whilst we're on it. A strong internal communication strategy throughout the process will be key in making the transition successful, particularly if you were working with hybrid teams. With people working in different places, it becomes more important to ensure that everyone hears the same message, feels equally listened to, and sees the same opportunities when they're available. So thank you very much. Again, I think it's the questions towards the end, so we'll pass over to Maddie.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Hello, sorry, I was just making some quick notes following on from what Lindsay and Geraldine were saying, so I'm good to go. I was noticing some of the questions that we've got in the chat box, which are very good. Hopefully, but Maddie, share the name. I should hopefully be able to answer your question as I'm going through, so fingers crossed I should be able to do that. You okay, Tracy, if I go ahead and share screen? So I'll check, can you all see my slides? Yep. That's a good sign. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about over the next 10 minutes is it's really kind of the key thing I think that's been coming out of the presentations we've seen so far and the questions we're seeing in the chat box coming up is around internal communications. So the title of this small segment is called You Need an Internal Comms Manual. It's taken from a blog, which I'm going to just, if I can find it, which is, I'll put the link up in the chat box afterwards. So there's a guy called Matt Lemmy who has written a really kind of, it's a very useful and helpful blog around what an internal comms manual is. There's a template up for it and it's really usable and easy to access. So I'll stick that up and you can all hopefully by the end of this be able to create something very similar and make your own document. Again, when I'm talking about internal comms, it's that communication that we have with each other as members of staff, as teammates, as friends in the workspace. It's communications around who's been on holiday, photos of brand new babies, staff that might be leaving, new staff that might be starting. So it can be that kind of just general office trivia that we might have to those really big things about going back into the workplace, updated on COVID rules, all those kind of different levels of communications that we're having. When I'm talking about comms itself and the word manual in particular, a manual can be, it's not about a big heavy tome of a document. It can be something that's a paragraph, half a page. We've got a comms manual in Team Digi and ours is 3/4 of a page. So it's something that really does set out how we're going to communicate, where we're going to communicate and what we can expect around that communication. So it really is, I think, Maddie's question around actually, how do we set boundaries? How do we set parameters? How do we stop that I'm not working, but actually I am working kind of attitude? So that's what, sorry, I've just got sheep marching up the driveway. I'm so sorry, that's totally taken me by surprise. I think they've escaped. So it is that idea about just thinking about how do we do this? How do we kind of set ourselves parameters and put guidelines around everything? So that's what a comms manual for me is very much looking at. The two key questions that a comms manual asks or that we're asking when we're putting a comms manual together is when you receive a message from your colleagues, do you know how quickly you're supposed to respond? Do they know how quickly you're supposed to respond? And also which communication channels are we supposed to respond on? It's one of the main things around this is that we can have lots and lots of tools. Most of us are using Teams, Slack, we might be using WhatsApp, we can be using email, there's Zoom, all of these tools we now have access to, some free, some not free, some that we were using before, we could be using Basecamp. And it's not necessarily the tool that's the issue, it's about our own kind of expectations and understanding of how we use this tool, what the tool is for, and when we're supposed to respond. So these are kind of two key questions, to be asking ourselves. So how quickly does a person expect a response? And where do they expect that response from? I do a lot of work with a guy called Ross McCullough, who some of you may know. And I have kind of had to say to Ross, I need you just to speak to me on one platform, because Ross does WhatsApp, he does email, he does Twitter, he does Slack. He's on all of these different platforms. And for me, there was one day where I was like, okay, you've asked me a question that I think is quite important and you need an answer now, but I cannot for the life of me remember where this question was. So I then actually had to end up phoning him to ask him what the question was. But it's that kind of thing around, there's so many different platforms. If we don't have just some basic parameters and guides around it, then we don't really know what we're supposed to do or we're supposed to go with it. So the main idea around this is to actually understand what the problem is. So it's not necessarily the tools that we're using that are the problem. It could be how we're actually using those tools. So really the main problem is there's a misalignment in assumptions about how we're using them. So some of us will use them for different things. Some of us won't use them for chat. Some of us might just engage every now and then. So there is that kind of misalignment of assumptions about what we're supposed to do with them, when we're supposed to use them, and how we're supposed to use them. So to kind of really help answering that question is to think about what are some of the specific challenges we're having around communication. And this was some of the key things I think that both Geraldine and Lindsay were talking about, that idea about choice, being able to give people that option to choose how they want to engage and when they want to engage, but then also making sure that we're involving people in these decisions and then actually working around that. Well, how do we know what the specifics are? So what are some of the issues that we're having? What's working, what's not working? I think Lindsay kind of touched on that as well, about actually going back and reviewing what is kind of working, what isn't working. We would use the phrase to have a retrospective about it. So it's something that you would do on a regular basis to figure out what's working and what's not working. And then also to think about what are the negative consequences of when we've had those miscommunications. So when those assumptions are misaligned, what have some of those negative consequences been? So again, back to Maddie's thing about you could be getting something after hours and you're checking it. So should you answer? So it could be that somebody is, Geraldine was talking about this, about it could kind of really create mental health issues for somebody, some real challenges. If I'm getting an out of hours Teams message from our chief exec, not that I am by any means that important, but you never know, it might happen, asking me to do something purely because Anna is up and about and that's how she works, whereas I'm a 9-to-5 person, then what do I suddenly then panic, spend my evening going, oh my God, she needs a response, should I do this? But I don't want to do this, I'm not working. So caught that kind of level of anxiety and panic around a lot of these things. So what are some of the negative consequences? So actually asking ourselves what some of those issues are. So carrying out, as we were talking about earlier, a basic retrospective. So a retrospective it's just a tool that they use in the software tech sphere, where distributed working, we call it hybrid working in our sector, the tech sector call it distributed working. As Geraldine also said, this has been around for a long time in that particular sector. It's new for us, but not in the world of business. So they carry out something called retrospective. So this is something that lasts for about an hour and it asks 3 key questions. So doing this around your current internal communication. So what are the things that are working around your ways that you're currently communicating internally? What are the things that are kind of working? And what are the things that can really be improved on? So actually being really honest with ourselves, saying, well, this works really well, this kind of works, this could really be different, we could just ditch this and move on, and stop trying to make something work that is broken. So actually just ditching, this is not working, and then moving on and trying something else. And this should help us create what we're calling, or certainly what's in Matt calls in his blog, guiding principles. So coming up with some basic guiding principles, and this really helps with that question, Maddie, that you were asking us about how do we manage our own work boundaries when others might be working very different hours. Asynchronous working is a big thing that's coming in at the moment. In my group, I think it was Wendy started to do this within her own organisation. So she might, sorry Wendy for using you as an example, might go and see the grandkids during the day, but then that allows her to work in the evening. So being able to kind of work in this very asynchronous way and having some guiding principles around how we communicate with each other really does make a difference about what we do, when we do it, and how we do it. And it's making sure that we are being true to ourselves and being responsible and accountable for our own actions. If we've got this stuff on our phones and our home phones, and we've got our work phones on, and we say, do you know what, I'm not going to answer this after 5 o'clock, then stop answering it after 5 o'clock. It's about being responsible for our own actions and just working around that way, but then also making sure that everybody understands that I will not respond to that after a certain amount of time, so they cannot expect a response. So having these guiding principles to help support us with these decisions, so that when I get that imaginary message from Anna knows that I'm not going to respond, and that's okay. That's not me being horrible to her as the chief exec. That's just Anna knows that that's what's going to happen. She's working then, I'm not, so she's going to have to wait. There are ways around that. If it's something really urgent, then you would have that in your comms manual about if it is something urgent, then perhaps a phone call is what's needed. So that if I got a phone call from Anna, I would think, okay, she definitely needs me to respond. She's phoned me. So knowing these things and having these guiding principles. Within our own, again, I'll get this sent round afterwards with the slides. I'm happy to share it. It does need updated, which is something that this webinar had brought to my attention, which is interesting. Within our team digital, we have our guiding principle is the one around it is fine to communicate out to the team when it suits you, but please only expect a response to your communication during office hours. So we do have members of staff, particularly those who are higher up, who like to work in the evenings, who do work at the weekends. And for those of us, people who have got kids, got families, who have got perhaps a much more set way of working, then it is for us saying, you know what, you're not going to get a response. I am going to only do this between these hours. And because that's us as a guiding principle, then we don't have to keep pushing back on that. It's there, we all know this. Lorna, who's started working at SCVO, who was also in my group, mentioned that having a really good induction process can really help with a lot of this internal communication. So if you've got your internal comms manual, whether it be half a page, a paragraph, however long it is, having that as part of your induction process can really help, and it can really make a difference to people coming in. And also that's the part when you can renew it and go back and look and see what's working. We've got things around Slack, so we've got a couple of points around how we use Slack within Team Digital. We also use Teams within SCVO, and it's very rarely that email is used as a communication in SCVO. We'd either use Teams or Slack. And if somebody gives us a phone, or if we get a text message, particularly within Team Digital, if I get a phone call from somebody, I tend to panic because it's not usual. We tend to use the different channels. So our document sets out what you can expect, when you can expect it, and from whom, if you like. The basic tools that we're all using are Slack, Teams, Zoom, WhatsApp. Some people are using things called Basecamp and other big project management tools called Asana. These ones, Basecamp and Asana and other kind of really big project management tools, they're not necessarily internal communication tools. They're for much bigger things, but they're managing whole projects, they're managing whole teams, they're managing internal, external, all kinds of different things. Whereas Slack was originally set up, it's an internal communication tool. It's now got bigger, as has Teams. Teams is Microsoft Office version of Slack. So Slack came first and then Teams was born. And those two are pretty much the same. And they've now got a lot bigger to encompass being able to work externally, being able to upload files, share pictures, video calling, all that kind of stuff. So they've become bigger due to our needs and what we want to do. Whereas Basecamp and Asana were already set up as project management tools. So they're different. So it's also around thinking, what is it that you want the tool to do? What is it that you're doing? So just to kind of finish up, some of the key things around this with your internal comms manual to make it really work for you is to make it your own, to revisit it frequently. So actually looking at, well, is this still working? To test it, to test things out. So not spending a fortune on introducing a whole new way of working for everybody, but perhaps have one group to test this. If you're a small team, it could be, if there's just 3 of you, say, do you know what, we're going to try to work like this for the next month. Let's come back and review it, see if it's working. If you're a bigger staff team, could you have different departments testing out different tools and then sharing that information with each other to see what actually is working within different teams? Use what's already there, introducing new tools when the communication's already broken. A tool's not going to fix that. If your comms isn't working, it's not working. Teams is not going to make it any better. It's probably going to make it worse. So actually having that, sitting down and going, what have we got that we can already use? How is it working? Doing that retrospective. Which bit of this is not working? Which bit is? And how can we build on the bit that is? And then also to think about what you'll do if somebody's not meeting the expectations. So if you've got your guidelines set up and then you find out that somebody's not following it, is this a case of you talk to them on a one-to-one basis? Can you do this in your support and supervision? Is it an internal chat? So how do you deal with that? So how do you kind of just keep that support going and that way of working? So the key tip to this is to understand, so the thing around internal comms is to really think about what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And the problem tends to be that it's these misaligned assumptions that we have about the tools and about how we're using them. So those are the key things, is what are the tools we've got, how are we using them, and what are they for? And actually working together to think, how do we make this better? How do we make this work for us? So once you've got those guiding principles in place, that's the ones that make the real difference, I would say. I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Maddie. That was great. As in most things in life, communication is key, I think, isn't it? There's been a few questions in the chat. Lindsay's managed to answer one already regarding insurance, and I'm afraid there wasn't a straight answer. Just, you know, what kind of cover do you need if you're working from home? Other things are around about safe equipment, that kind of thing. I mean, we do have our HR and employment service that you can contact direct, and we will try and address what we can in the follow-up email. Somebody else mentioned about management training and support. You know, I think that there is going to be a lot around that with people working from home. It's a whole new way of working. And Maddie has put a link to the blog in the chat there. But again, we will send that out in our email with all the slides. So I think we've tried to cover most of the questions there, because unfortunately we are running out of time. I just wondered if any of our panelists wanted to say anything else before we go. We've got about a minute or two left.
Just on the point about management training and support, Tracy, if anyone's looking for an additional conversation about that, Flexibility Works is here just for a listening ear, or to put you in touch with different trainers as well. So please do get in touch via hello@flexibilityworks.org if that's helpful.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, as I've said, Lindsay, it's the same with the HR service. People can just get in touch with you with any specific questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure, Maddie, you're going to be a listening ear for any digi. Can people contact you directly if we put your contact details in?
Absolutely. I'm going to do a plug for myself. Our senior leader program has just opened for applications if anybody's interested. So I'll put the link to that in the chat box too.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, it just remains for me to say thank you very much for joining us today. As I say, the recording of this will be on our website, probably by the end of the day or certainly tomorrow. Do get back in touch with us either through the information service, the HR service, and we can direct your inquiries. And thanks again. I hope you found this useful.